Life is chaos, and especially in our day and age with AI disruption, quote unquote. That, of course, is not the only challenge facing us, but it is one challenge that is certainly reminding us that life is chaos. I'm Angel Miller, the author of The Path of the Warrior Mystic, Being a Man in an Age of Chaos, and just released Transcend the Chaos. Now, why am I so interested in chaos, and why does it keep popping up in my books? Even though we live in a highly technological age, things come up, things go down. Technologies are emerging slowly over decades, and then they explode on the scene, changing everything. Life is inherently chaotic and unpredictable. Of course, within that, there are patterns that can be sometimes detected and predicted, but largely we live in an unpredictable, chaotic world, and we must deal with what is the substance of this chaos as it is. Now, I'm going to let you into a little secret. My book, Transcend the Chaos, was originally called Transform the Chaos, at least that was my working title, but publishers love to tinker with titles, and so it is now Transcend the Chaos. But it is transcending it not through being aloof or thinking that we are better than this world, but by engaging it. Now, of course, we human beings like to believe that we live in an essentially static world. So even those who protest against the system and seem to, or quote unquote system, and seem to want to introduce some chaos or novelty or whatever it may be, very often view the system as static, or as our world as static. So they talk, for example, about the 1%, how the 1% owns everything and is keeping us down. But in fact, people come in and go out of the 1% all the time. And it's generally believed that a family will lose its wealth by the second generation, and 90% will have lost it by the third generation. Well, if you are enjoying this content, please do like and subscribe. And we ourselves can see that people born into wealth are very good often at knowing how to spend that money, but not always very good at knowing how to create an income, how to support themselves, and essentially just drain off the wealth that their parents or perhaps grandparents had created. Of course, that's not always the case, but that is often the case. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you might find, sometimes do find, very poor individuals who struggle and force themselves to the very top and then make wealth themselves. Things are always in flux, and there is always some kind of opportunity both to rise up and to fall down. Of course, falling down is a lot easier and takes a lot less effort. Now, what about consciousness, especially in relation to AI? And we talk of AI as artificial intelligence, so we think of intelligence as having some kind of consciousness. And indeed, we think about ChatGPT or Google's Gemini almost as if they are living beings, and periodically there is a scare that they have reached consciousness and are effectively almost like human beings, but in machine form, and not that they are just going through some algorithmic equations or some sort of pseudo-logical process that they've been programmed to do. Now, consciousness, I think, because of the emergence of AI or of programs that mimic human consciousness will, of course, be something that we want to investigate more and more as the decades pass, particularly at the upper echelons of society. And indeed, it should be said that some AI researchers, or at least one anyway, studied the brain and the neocortex and tries to apply it to AI. But that may be great for someone developing this new technology, but we ourselves will need to peer inside our own minds almost to survive this technology as it expands over the decades and indeed over the centuries. What is consciousness? Well, one thing I notice in relation to art, for example, if we can call it art, AI will generate images in a way that a human being does not. So that a human artist is involved in a process that is not logical, is intuitive painting. There is not this sort of continual logical process. It is intuitive about how let's say in painting, how the brush is moved, for example. And of course, within that, there's all kind of randomness as well. The paint might not apply as exactly as one imagined. But with AI images, they begin as a kind of fuzzy shape or shapes, and then they become sharper and sharper until an image is revealed, and it's going through some logical process or some kind of algorithmic process that mimics logic in order to create art that we would create non-logically. Dancing might be a better example, or martial arts, where the body just sort of moves by itself because it's been trained through muscle memory, and there's no rational thinking or logical thinking that intervenes in that process, and certainly there is no time for it to intervene. The body just takes over, or perhaps in a more religious or spiritual sense we might say the body and the spirit, but not the intellect. But in a sense the AI is all intellect. But as we find with human beings who are all intellect and they've let their body go and they don't have any kind of spiritual understanding, these are very distorted people with very distorted and wrong ideas about how the world works, about how society works, and about the nature of existence. Now, certainly in the medieval period, which may have had a lot wrong with it, but nevertheless, during the medieval period, there was the conception of ratio and intellect. As ratio, the rational mind, the workhorse. You go through some logical processes to solve a particular problem, and versus intellectus, which was contemplation. You're absorbed in what is, absorbed in a landscape, absorbed in some object in nature, a flower, and you absorb, in a sense, the mind of God that has been embodied in the world, the creator, the mind of the creator. And even leaving aside this kind of religious or spiritual impulse to just absorb beauty, to be immersed in it, with creators themselves, of course, creators often force themselves through some kind of process, and the solution to a problem doesn't work, it doesn't come. But then as they forget about it, as they relax, as they leave this problem aside, then it strikes them like lightning. We've all heard of that cliche, being struck as if by lightning. The solution to the answer comes when they are not going through the logical process. Very often, of course, because solutions to problems aren't logical, or we would have found them already, because most people have the capacity to go through some logical train of thought, even if they don't use it very often. In Mad Men, of course, the drama series, Don Draper, the head creative, is talking to his junior copywriter, his assistant, and says, just think about it intensely and then forget about it, and it will just pop up in your face, this solution to that. So we have to think about things intensely and then forget about it, to switch to some other mode of consciousness, which AI does not have. And indeed, we find that great creators often enter some kind of altered state of consciousness to be inspired, whether that's obviously through taking some kind of psychedelic drug, or just entering into dreams or being inspired by dreams. Karl Lagerfeld, for example, the great fashion designer, would often be inspired by what he saw in dreams, and even saw an entire fashion collection in his dreams as he woke up one day, and then sketched out what he saw and produced that as his upcoming collection. Salvador Dali, again, a person who seems to have embodied this altered states of consciousness in his own artwork, probably more than anyone else. Dali would go through a whole system of sleep and dreams and using self-hypnosis before he began a painting so that he could be inspired and see things that he wouldn't ordinarily see. Now, we, of course, are skeptical of dreams. We're certainly skeptical of self-hypnosis and trance. But these are the states of consciousness that tap into the genius, that transcend the rational, that transcend the algorithmic, and that seem almost, or perhaps even literally, to touch on the divine. Apparently, the Old Norse people had a term meaning dream sickness, a person who would not dream. So certainly pre-modern people have been much more in touch with this other kind of consciousness, and it was much more integrated into their daily life, whereas we are skeptical of these things and think we can solve everything rationally, which we cannot. Now, I said I was going to mention connections, and it has been shown that wealthier and more successful people cultivate and rely on weak ties. Now, what are weak ties? Simply put, these are people that we are connected to but don't spend a great deal of time with. Maybe we only touch base with them once a year, or even less, or a little more, whatever it is, but they are not in our immediate circle. Poorer people tend to rely on their immediate circle or strong ties, but the problem with that is those people tend to have the same or very similar information to us. So if someone is looking for a job, our strong ties know the same vacancies or the same companies that we do, or the same opportunities or the same lack of opportunity. Whereas a weak tie has a different circle of friends, different circle of connections, and they have information that we don't have. So it is important for us to make these connections in life with other people. But there is another reason beyond trying to secure better positions, and that is from a more creative, consciousness-oriented perspective, that we also want to create or cultivate these connections. And in artistic or intellectual circles, or circles of people who are highly educated, one person might be an artist, another a writer, another working for some organization that's doing interesting things, and they are able to kind of pool ideas together and to draw on different things that the group as a whole would never have heard of. Or one person who is an artist might be introduced to a writer that they've never heard of, or the writer might be introduced to an artist, and so that their world together is expanded a great deal, and they have these new sort of novel ideas, and novel information is introduced to them, which will enable them to think differently, to create more innovative writing or art or companies or products or services, or whatever it is, to be innovative in some way and to expand in some way. And of course, hearing of this, some novel information or idea can immediately spark an idea in us if we have some kind of foundation in some world, art, literature, music, whatever it may be, or computing. I'm sure there are more modern things that we could think of. But at other times, these things need to gestate. We need to think about them intensely, like a Don Draper says in Mad Men, and then forget about it or switch consciousness, and the solution or some new idea for us will then emerge out of this sort of stew that we have that's been gestating of different information. Some of it we have, some of it we've just learned, whatever it may be. Certainly, with me, I have noticed, not so much recently, but a few years ago, that I would get solutions to problems when I went into a state of meditation or came out of a state of meditation, usually going in actually. So as I began to relax, I would suddenly realize the solution to a problem that I had been thinking about, and then I would have to go and write it down or act on that solution. And companies such as Microsoft are now introducing these spaces or rooms for meditation, and it's probably not because they think, well, wouldn't it be nice to, give them a break? Maybe that's part of it, but I'm sure it is also part of it is recognizing that as we switch consciousness, then solutions often occur to us, or it helps us to think about things in a different way. We become inspired even. And so it would seem to me from those sorts of examples of Microsoft creating these environments, or other significant corporations and creating these sort of environments with meditation spaces, or designed even to have people from different departments interacting, accidentally introducing some kind of chaos into these orderly environments, that they recognize that consciousness and even altered states of consciousness are going to be a part of at least work that is creative and inspirational and thinking outside the box. Or much of the work in the world today that is easily done and is just routine, and that's all going to be automated by AI, of course, which is going to be a real problem, especially for those who are seeking entry-level jobs, because they will all be taken by AI. But for those who are creators, those who are decision makers, this cultivating of our consciousness is going to be essential for inspiration, essential for finding solutions. And I would suggest it is also something that we would want to cultivate. Meditation, I prefer self-hypnosis, but maybe you practice meditation or self-hypnosis every day as a way of also de-stressing and coping with the chaos around us. Well, if you want to transform the chaos and take control of your life and ascend rather than be dragged down by this chaotic, entropic world and all of the changes that are coming at us, do check out Transcend the Chaos, Proven Integral Techniques for Emotional Control, Confidence, and Creativity. And that's available in the US right now and elsewhere by the end of this year, 2025. Thanks very much.